In one of the articles you published last month, Jim, you talked about, I think it was 10 ways to enhance leadership engagement. And the purpose was to help executive management and the board remain engaged and aligned over time, which you just touched on. When these leaders consider the impact of external changes on their business, you suggested that they focus on critical assumptions that underlie the corporate strategy. This is going to allow them to assess the strategic risks and deal with that uncertainty we've been talking about. And then to test the assumptions, you mentioned things like scenario planning as a technique to expose risk and the upside, the opportunity piece. Give me an example of using scenarios around business strategy, and are there other techniques that organizations should be considering or applying to strengthen their planning and achieve their objectives?
Sure. I think that scenario analysis is where we are combining what we know with what we don't know, and with the objective of articulating some internally consistent views of the future, some of them plausible, some of them extreme, so that we can reality check some of our assumptions and expectations underlying our strategy, address what-if questions that we might have, or test the sensitivity of environmental factors that could potentially impact our strategy and maybe warrant monitoring over time. So I think there are a lot of examples, scenarios developed around and focused on commodity price changes in commodity prices, interest rate changes. Everybody kind of up in arms about what the Fed's going to do. They're going to raise rates 3 times. That's pretty much what they're going to say. But the market just absolutely tanked a few weeks ago in fear that the Fed might increase rates more than 3 times. So, that maybe is a signal that we ought to assess, do stress testing around what's our sensitivity to interest rates being increased, but also around supply chain disruption, geopolitical events. I'll give you one specific example, a foreign manufacturer that when Donald Trump was elected president, their chairman of the board asked the management team to assess different scenarios dependent on, what the president-elect's new administration might do with respect to following up on the president-elect's campaign promises around altering trade relationships and exiting trade pacts and, holding certain countries to account and so forth and so on. And this was not looking for a risk of an Armageddon. The chairman's view was this was looking for opportunities. Will there be market opportunities that we can focus on? And so this is a good illustration because it illustrates some of the attributes of effective scenario planning, scenario analysis. It had top management support. This was at the very top. It was measurable because it was focused on the current business plan and what impact it might have on the business plan. It was actionable and realistic because it dealt with not some hypothetical scenario, something that was very, very real that everyone could relate to and understand. And it was time bound, meaning it was looking at the potential implication of the business plan for the planning horizon that business plan covered. So that's a great example. I think that contrarian analysis is another technique, looking at how realistic your strategic assumptions are and assessing what factors in the external environment might impact those assumptions that would cause you to have to go back and revisit your strategy.
So we talked about scenario planning and some other things. The organization I came from, we used wargaming, game theory, and then when it came to scenario planning, what we did is we would take they called it the medium-term plan, the 3-year plan, if you would, And we worked with the business planning people, but also the chief economists and others to come up with scenarios. So we developed 10 scenarios to apply against the medium-term plan. And what was interesting about that, it included some of the things you talked about around interest rates, geopolitical, what's going to happen in Russia, what happens if the Brazil-Mexico trade agreement is altered, what happens if there's a slowdown in China, those kind of things. What was interesting is that when we did a look back a year later, even though that we assessed the probabilities of these things occurring to only be 20%, 7 of the 10 had occurred. That's how much change was going on globally around the company. And the good thing is that we were prepared. Since we had identified these risks, we were prepared to take action should they occur. And so we were still able to meet the business plan and all those kinds of things. That's the value of risk management that some people do not really understand. And using scenarios and other kinds of techniques are really the effective way to get those issues on the table.
I agree completely. I agree completely. I think what's interesting about game theory is that it's really coming out of a military area, and it's really getting more ingrained in business now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's we're seeing a lot more of that.
Mm-hmm. And the chairman of our risk committee, we would talk with him about, he called them after action reviews because he had actually come out of the Navy. And we called him something else, but in the Japan crisis, for example, with the tsunami, we did a look back to see what could we have done better? How could we be better prepared next time? So they, like you said, the military deals with...
That was a game changer, wasn't it? That was a game changer, for sure.
It really was. A lot of lessons there.